Hi, everybody. Welcome to our chat about the Hubble Space Telescope, named after Edwin Hubble. And I have with me today Leo Balge, IMAX lead senior engineer, and James Nyhouse, ASC director of photography and IMAX training manager. And we're here to celebrate the 10th anniversary of the IMAX movie, Hubble 3D. It's really a unique look into Hubble Space Telescope's legacy, and IMAX had a great deal to do with making the world really aware of the Hubble telescope and looking into the stars and understanding the universe. The movie was produced and directed by Toni Myers and Graeme Ferguson. You'll see a little bit of Toni in a video a little bit later. So I wanted to turn it over to my friend James Nyhouse, who's been working with IMAX for decades, trained a lot of astronauts, and train the astronauts in the NBL. Tell us about the NBL, James.
Well, the NBL is the Neutral Buoyancy Lab. It's a big swimming pool built out by Ellington Air Force Base in Houston that has a lot of water in it, and it's able to hold full-size models of the Hubble Space Telescope. So the astronauts would go in, they would suit up in their EVA, their extravehicular activity suits, and get in the water and do a pretend spacewalk and do the work they were going to do in space and practice it in this semi-zero G environment in the swimming pool. So sort of the center right, you see the Hubble underneath the two yellow balloons. That's the space telescope. The rectangular structure are simulating the solar panels.
So now I think it'd be a good time to look at this video that we have that you shot in the NBL, and it shows the IMAX two-strip camera, and it shows you doing all the things you do underwater with the astronauts. So let's roll that tape.
This is the IMAX 3D crew working at the NBL, which is the Neutral Buoyancy Lab at Johnson Space Center. It's where the astronauts practice their spacewalks in a swimming pool. They dress up in their spacesuits and hop in the water, and it makes them think they're in space.
This pool is absolutely fantastic. It has 6.5 million gallons of water in it, and inside there's a whole shuttle with its cargo bay, and they've got the Hubble inside, a mock-up of the Hubble sticking up there, and that's how the astronaut teams train to do their spacewalks. We have two cameras. We have one on the top side that we shoot their suiting up and getting ready to go in, and then the underwater camera, it goes underneath into the pool with Howard Hall and Peter Craw and Drew Feldman, and they're shooting all of the rehearsals that the spacewalkers do under there.
So there's one eye, that's the left eye, and then up here is the right eye. So there's mirrors.
Drew, take some pictures.
Bounce it up and down. So it comes in, makes turns, goes around, goes sideways.
Well, this is the IMAX camera. You can see the two lenses, the left and right eye lens, used to make the stereo image. We shoot with it on a dolly most of the time because the camera weighs 270 some odd pounds. Here the assistants are reloading the camera, an operation that takes about 20 minutes and about 11 feet of film. Here you can see the two film gates, the left and the right eye. The magazines, there are 4 chambers on the back, 2 take up, 2 feed. Holds 1,000 feet of film, actually 2,000 feet, left and right eye. Goes through the camera at about 11 feet per second. So that's quite a commitment when you turn the camera on to run. You want to make sure everything is absolutely right at that point.
This is a film it's the life story of the Hubble Space Telescope, and it's the first time we'll be seeing it in 3D. We have filmed it before in 2D, back in '89, and then again in 1993.
Since we shot the original Hubble deploy and first repair mission in IMAX, the company has come up with a system to convert 2D to 3D. So fortunately, we will be able to see all this great footage that was shot back in 1989, 1993 in 3D in the finished film.
You know, you're underwater, you're in your scuba tank, and you know you can move the camera around a lot. But once you're in this spacecraft and you're in space, you're very limited. How did you and Toni figure out about what lens to use, what tilt?
So we didn't have a whole lot of choices of where we could put the camera because the shuttle payload bay was so crowded with the hardware that was necessary to repair the Hubble Space Telescope. So we picked the optimal spot of the limited things we had. And it turned out that we were right at the base of the telescope, and we had to tilt up about 18 degrees, and we looked up at the telescope as it was setting in the flight service structure. And the astronauts would come in and they would do work inside the telescope and up and around it. And in order to be able to see the entire telescope, we had to use either a 30 millimeter fisheye or a 40 millimeter regular rectilinear lens. So those were two of our choices. And so that we'd be able to cut between shots, we picked a little longer lens, the 60 millimeter, to enable us to get punched in a little bit closer, a little bit more detail, and see up inside the bowels of the Space Telescope. We worked with a very interesting group of people at NASA called the DOUG Lab. And DOUG is an acronym, and I forget exactly what it stands for, but they came up with the word so that it would spell out the word Doug. At NASA, you get points for acronyms if they make real words.
Okay.
But anyway, we were in this virtual reality lab, and they modeled our camera in the cargo bay with the lenses, and we could set in with them and actually go through every EVA and see where the astronauts are going to be and what we were going to see during different spacewalks. And this turned out to be a very useful tool to help us pre-visualize what we were going to see, how wide the lens should be or how close we should be, when we should roll the camera.
And I want to turn it over now to Leo Balge, who was really instrumental in helping design the cameras and actually the film that went into the spacecraft.
Yeah, it was, the ICBC had many challenges, of which one of those challenges was getting a roll of film together that would fit inside the ICBC camera, which is the IMAX cargo bay camera. And that had to be 5,400 feet because Kodak didn't have the ability to make a 5,400 foot roll. So we had to splice the film together. And of course, it's negative film and it can't be exposed to light. So making a splice was a challenge. We used a film splicer, ultrasonic film splicer to join the two ends of the roll together. And we had to do this in the dark. It had to be such that it didn't change the dimension of the film. In other words, the film wasn't thicker, because if the splice was thicker, it would probably jam in the camera. So we had to measure this after we made it, and we had to also trim the flashing on the at the splice, and we had to make sure that when we were handling it to make the splice, that any pressure marks didn't cause a pressure exposure of the film. We made 3 of these rolls, so we had a backup roll in case one got damaged, or we had to change out for other reasons the roll of film. And so that was how we put together a 5,400 foot roll of film for our camera.
That's great, Leo. And so you've got it loaded, and we've got a picture here of the cargo, the ICBC, and putting the thermal blankets on it. There it is. You describe that to us, Leo, what they're doing there.
Sure. So to make sure the camera sits at a relatively comfortable temperature, we had to build a container that would keep some air pressure inside. And that container, being metal, had to be protected thermally so that any heat that we generated within the container to keep the camera warm wouldn't be conducted out by the container and radiated into space. So the thermal blankets prevent this from happening. And it's dry nitrogen too, which is important to so that you don't have oxygen in that atmosphere. And it's dry so that you don't get any condensation of the moisture on the on, let's say, the window.
What, of course, is we know that James is going to tell us about that. We actually did get panic calls from space.
What happened was when they're working out on the Hubble telescope, they only had cameras for the person using the robotic arm to maneuver the camera, to maneuver the astronaut and tools and stuff around with. And so they had once decided, well, we can see this particular task better through the IMAX camera than we can through the NASA cameras. So they had opened it up to look at this particular spot while they were doing the EVA, and then they didn't close it back down. So it sat there looking out at dark space, and all the heat was rushing right out of the glass, and it caused condensation, you know, like forms on the inside of your windshield of your car to form. And we found out about it. We're sitting in mission control, and it's late at night, and we get the call that you just don't want to hear, which is,
Houston, we have a problem. That was
Houston, we have a problem.
Right.
And it's IMAX. So we figured out what caused it, and we closed the door up and asked them not to do that anymore. And fortunately, it cleared up the fog. The heaters inside the camera had the condensation dissipated by the time we were ready to shoot our next shot. So, but it was the typical day on console during a space flight. Hours and hours of sheer boredom followed by seconds of absolute panic.
So I want to go back to Leo for a minute. Tell us a little bit about, you know, the 30 perf camera. I think we only made a couple of those, and I think they're in one of our questioners from museum said, you know, what happened to those cameras?
The thing with this 3D IMAX cameras is that we couldn't use our previous developments of 3D IMAX camera systems. They were way too large to put into a container, or you can put it in the orbiter. So a new system had to be developed, and basically what they did to reduce the size of it, they made a movement so that you could expose the left and right eye image on the same strip of film side by side. So that means as the strip of film goes through the camera and gets exposed, every other image is a left eye image and every other image is a right eye image. And when the film is developed, then of course we have to separate the images so that we can get a left eye sequence and a right eye sequence for a film projector. And that's how we were able to get our cameras, our newly developed cameras, on board the shuttle.
You know, in all the space movies we made, we learned about what happens to film in space, not from a physical point of view, but from a sensitimetric point of view. But I want James to talk about what happens to film in space, the speed of the film, and what happens to digital in space. There's unique things you have to overcome. Over to you, James.
Right. Early on, actually, the first flight that we did in, I think it was 1984, we experienced some fogging, some radiation damage to the film, which caused it to pulse. It was like the lights, you dim it up and dim it down, dim it up, dim it down, and it just pulsed. And we thought it was a lab processing error. Of course, it's never the lab.
You always try to blame it on me, I know.
It's always David's fault. But it turned out to be high energy cosmic particles that above around 280, 290 miles, you get more of these cosmic particles, and they expose the high speed film and cause this situation. And it took us quite a while to figure that out. And finally figured out that one of the ways to keep the high speed film from fogging was to stick it in between bags of water. We just stuffed the film in between those bags, and the water slows down those high energy cosmic particles enough to where it doesn't do damage as quickly. It still damages the film, but not nearly as quick.
Right. And then tell us what happens with a digital camera in space.
With the digital cameras, of course, you don't have film, you've got a sensor. And that sensor is sensitive to light. You know, that's why it works. So those sensors are made up of millions of photosites. And if one of the cosmic particles hits one of those photosites just right, it can cause it to fail, to short out, which means you have a hole in your picture. And if you get enough of those little holes, it makes a bigger hole. Or if you get them in enough different places, it makes a lot of spots all over your picture. So we got a few of those on Hubble because it was at a high altitude. But it wasn't real. We weren't there long enough to really do any super damage to the image sensors. And everything in Hubble that you see that's shot inside the space shuttle is shot with a small Canon HDV G1 camcorder, and then up-res to IMAX, and then converted to 3D. So it was quite a task. We asked that little camera to do an awful lot of work that it was never intended to do, and it did a pretty good job.
So we talked about the 30-perf camera, we talked about the little Canon HD camera, but we didn't talk much about the big IMAX 3D camera that you used in the pool, and you also used in what I like to call the fireboxes. So talk about shooting launches with IMAX cameras.
Well, throughout our history with IMAX, one of the most demanding and one of the most interesting shots, of course, is a launch shot. Everybody loves feeling that rumble in the theater, the great sound systems that we have. You want to be up close with IMAX. So what we would do, we would put cameras in blast-proof, explosion-proof boxes up close to the shuttle, sometimes within a couple hundred feet, and sometimes closer. And these cameras were run by remote control through NASA's Launch Control System. So whenever the countdown hit 30 seconds, 31 seconds, it would send a signal to start the IMAX camera. The IMAX camera would start up, and it would run, and it would shoot the launch, and everything would go fine. But one time they decided ahead of time to do a test on the Launch Control System, and they got to the point where they started our camera, not knowing that whenever they stopped their test, our camera would keep running. So our camera just kept and ran all the film out without the rocket going anywhere. And so that was one of the few times that we didn't get the launch shot that we wanted, because it kind of sat there the day before and didn't go anywhere.
How close can you get? The camera's remote, but where are you? Because sometimes you're manning a camera to actually tilt, because the firebox shots are static.
The closest they let anybody get during a launch is 1 mile from a shuttle. And that was the advanced rescue crew. They were stationed inside a little M13 tank that they could drive up and help astronauts if they had to in an emergency. But everybody else was at least 3 miles away. So we would be back at a press site or at a remote camera site and to shoot it with the IMAX camera that was manned. Occasionally, we would put a camera on one of NASA's trackers. What they would do is there would be a guy in launch control, and he would anticipate the shuttle launching and start the tilt up so that he could be in time with the shuttle, and he would just follow it up with his tracker. And it's like you have a manned camera right there on the launch pad, but it was run remotely as well. So there's all sorts of tricks we used to get you up close and personal with these launches for the movies that we've been doing.
So Leo, what was it like? I mean, you're in the headquarters of NASA. You're at consoles. You're listening to astronauts. That must have been a pretty cool thing to be doing.
Yes, it was a very surreal experience in the sense that it's a different world inside with all this communication going on, and you're having to listen on various loops. We're also retrieving data. We were monitoring the current buses that were providing power to our cameras, so we had sort of an indication if the camera had done a shot or not, because it had a specific signature that you could see on the power draw, and there were other clues that would help too, and the production people very much interested in having this information so they could sort of piece together these pieces to help them understand the shot better that was being made.
So, as we move forward, we got to look to the future. What do you guys, see as a future of IMAX, IMAX in space? We did have Beautiful Planet. I think our days are probably gone shooting film in space. But Leo, what would you like to see us do next?
All these space films are spectacular, and when NASA does something unique, it's always another opportunity in which we could film if we're in the right position to be able to do that, make that arrangement with them to be able to do that.
Hopefully to the moon. I would love an IMAX camera on Mars someday. I hope I live to see that day. What do you think's in our future, James?
Well, I would really like to see some IMAX shot on the moon. I think physically on the moon, shooting back at Earth. I've got a shot that I want to do. You know how we see the corona of the sun during a solar eclipse from Earth?
Right.
Well, we're going to see the corona of the sun blocked out from the Earth blocking it out rather than the moon blocking it out. Of course, the Earth's going to have an atmosphere, and so you're going to have these beautiful sunset colors all the way around the Earth during this eclipse, as well as the solar corona going out from it. And I think it's probably going to be one of the most stunning sights that a human will ever see in the very near future. Apart from that, I think going to Mars is going to be a great thing to do. Of course, all these will have to be digital capture things. We can't fly film up there and back. This won't work. So looking forward to getting some really super high-res digital imaging up to and on the moon, to the lunar gateway, to the Mars gateway, and onto Mars as well.
I don't think there's really anything more amazing than watching these movies in the huge big screens. IMAX, especially Hubble, the 3D sequence. IMAX really makes you understand we're little grains of, we're so insignificant things, but makes you really humble. And the dome systems, our dome systems really are amazing to really get you immersed. Patricia and I did a SMPTE conference last year, and we had a feed from the space station, and nobody knew that IMAX was in the audience.
What images from the space program inspired you when you were younger?
And for me, something that stands out are the IMAX films of my childhood. So things like The Dream is Alive, Hail Columbia. I grew up in a small town. We didn't have an IMAX theater or anything. So I actually saw my first IMAX film when I went to space camp. And it completely blew my mind, and I was enthralled with it. Just the fact that, with the wraparound screen, you felt completely immersed. And every year that I went back to space camp, I saw the same movies, but I never got tired of them.
There's 3 or 4 or 5 astronauts as children. They saw our movies and really propelled them into thinking about being astronauts. And hopefully we continue to do that as we move forward with new digital capture techniques, new sound techniques. We've got 12-channel sound now in our IMAX theaters. And I certainly can't wait, along with all my colleagues, to get back to the movies. And I thank you, both you guys, for being instrumental in getting Hubble made. And I thank our theaters and all our partners around the world who've shown it to children and educated them. And we can't wait to continue. So thanks very much, guys.
Thank you,
Thanks
David.
for the opportunity.
It's been great talking with you.
Bye, everybody. Stay safe.